I had to first realize what I was doing that was giving you a negative about me, that I didn't love
Perception, yeah.
you or had no care about you. That for me was hard. I'm like, oh, how could that even happen? But I had to look at myself. Well, how have I been responding? How have I been available? How have I nurtured this relationship? Especially we're family, and to me, a family is should be a close relationship. I know it's not for everybody, and I'm still working on some of those areas of my family that have kind of slipped away. But I desire to have that closeness again. So that was the first thing, and that was me, because I get to control how I respond to my family members, the people that God has put around my life, my friends, my neighbors, whatever. So that's just about me. I can't expect everyone else to change so that
Right.
I can like them or interact with them or whatever. So that was the first thing, was figuring out how I was putting off a vibe that was not approachable. And that was hard for me to realize.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Bonnie Violet. I'm a trans femme genderqueer spiritual drag artist, and you are at Splintered Grace. This is my co-host.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us as part of your life today. My name is Tina Frank. I am a mature conservative Christian who follows the teachings of Jesus Christ. And we just talked about not having enough coffee already.
Right?
And today we thought it would be fun for us to talk about community.
Mm,
We've had, well, there's all types of community actually, from the community that we live in to the community that we hang out in and the community that we want to grow into. So we thought might be nice for us to talk about community, the communities that we are in, the communities maybe that we've come from and we're headed to. And we'd love to hear about your community and maybe some
mm.
ideas that you might have for us about building and sustaining a good community that can foster our personal growth. So, good morning, everybody. That's a lot to say, first thing.
Yes, no, it's good. It's good. I have a little bit of a head start because as I was telling you, I had the time, I flipped the time the wrong direction. So I've been up and going for a while this morning. So,
You'd have been all by yourself an hour ago,
oh,
going,
well,
what
I
is
was.
this?
I was when I first realized it, I was like, oh wait, I still have some time. So
That's
yeah, it was
awesome.
no big deal. No big
But
deal.
I'm
So
so blessed that we don't have that time change here. I don't have to
mm,
worry about any of that. The time is always the time that it's going to be. Sorry.
yeah, well, and I feel like I'm usually when I'm in a different time zone, oftentimes it's earlier where I'm at than like than wherever I'm doing something. So I
Yeah.
think that's because I was on the East Coast for so long, or even when I was in San Francisco, you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
until like this time change. So
Yeah.
anywho, it seems like it shouldn't be that confusing, but it gets me every time.
I keep hearing rumors that they're going to stop it. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I'll even like literally I'll look and be like, okay, oh yeah, they're an hour behind. Okay, so that means I need to do an hour earlier. And that's like, no, girl, that's not even what you just said.
That's so funny.
Because even last night when I went to bed, I looked just to confirm, like, yeah, okay, so it's like 8:30 there, it's 9:30 here. So okay, so I'll get up. Means shows at 7:10.
That's so
Nope,
funny.
it's 9:10. Yeah, so it makes a 2 hour difference. But
Wow. Well, hey, we'll get you off and started for your day early. You
yes,
look great. So you got lots of time to enjoy it now.
indeed. So community, well, I mean, when we're asking about like what is the function of community, or what communities do you feel like you're a part of? Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I thought a good starting point would be how do we define community? And yeah, what communities are we currently functioning in? I can go first if you want.
Yeah.
Um, for me, community are the people that I have around me, those that I have relationships with, and those that are available for me to have relationship with. I'm finding that as I get more mature, my time I feel is more precious to me. And so I'm a little more um, reserved with giving up my time. And I think there's some great things that can come from that. And I think there's some not so great things that can come from that. So for me, community is the people that I have around me that are going to enhance and help me to grow in my life and bring me peace and joy and all of those things so I can continue to move forward. So nutshell, I don't want to talk too long. So your turn.
Oh, no, you're not talking too long at all. Yeah, I mean, I can echo that a little bit, and I think the key is like communities. I think
Yeah,
that
that's true.
we often have a lot of communities, and I think one of the blessings of communities, and I think one of the challenges of communities is that, or even just maybe being in community as in one, is that one, it's great because oftentimes there's some sort of similarity or there's some sort
Mhm.
of like something that ties us together, right? That brings
Yeah,
us
that you have
together.
in common. Yeah,
Um, and that can be really helpful. I know that for me, sometimes I've been parts of communities with folks who are maybe challenged by something similar or having maybe a different experience, than maybe the general population, but it's something that you have in together. So I think it can be really helpful in kind of building, like strengthening one another and encouraging one another,
yeah,
not feeling so isolated and alone. Um, but I think also the other side of that is that it can also, I think, keep you from, I think community could have a way of kind of keeping you away from a lot too, because
yeah,
you can kind of start to get to where you're just around people like yourself or who share this one similarity, which is usually often just even one part of yourself.
that's
Um,
true.
that doesn't quite allow you to even really explore or share more of yourself. I think something we were talking about a little bit before is kind of like the idea of like authenticity. I think
Yeah,
oftentimes we only get to see each other in a certain light, in a certain way. There's so much more of us that sometimes we don't bring into that space for like whatever reason.
yeah,
Um, and that's good. And it's also can be, I think, detrimental in the long run if we don't find a space where we can express those other parts of ourselves. Um, if not with that community, at least with maybe another community or whatever.
right, right. So I agree with you. I think we have a number of communities around us. And I think all of our relationships with those communities creates a level of vulnerability. Would you agree? So even
Yeah.
though I'm vulnerable in certain parts, I think that we run a risk
Hmm.
of being in community with people of being hurt, or maybe even I don't know. I don't like to do drama kind of a person,
Mm.
or getting caught up in drama. And I think we have to be careful of that because being in community, we want to do all those things that you just described. We want
Yeah.
to encourage one another, support one another, empower one another, and you got to have it all.
Hmm.
And I think that's very much wisdom that you shared about the way we gather community, the way we go through community, the way we seek out community. And I think it's important that we all have some sort of community around us on an edifying side,
Right.
because community can also take away from us if we allow it to do that.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that we talk about or we consider those things when we're looking for a place that we think we want to belong.
Hmm. Yeah, I know for me as I've gotten older, it's become more and more important for me to be able to bring all of who I am wherever I
Yeah.
am. I don't want to feel like I have to. I think because I've had identities or experiences that I felt like weren't going to be accepted or allowed or appropriate. And that's not to say there aren't times when it still isn't a good idea to bring your full self into
Yeah.
something. But I think being able to bring more of the whole person of who I am into whatever space I am in, I think is better for all parties involved. But it can be difficult, I think, until we get to a space of being comfortable with our whole self, to be able to be vulnerable, like you said, to share a part of ourselves that might seem to be outside of that norm or the status quo of that particular community that we're a part of.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Hmm.
Now, I sometimes have a hard time going into new communities or even considering being a part of another community. And I don't know if it's because I don't see that connection point within myself, within that community, or if I don't know. I just sometimes struggle with that. Have you ever had that
Mhm.
struggle?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, there's, I think a lot of, yeah, there's plenty of communities that I've maybe wanted to be a part of, but I felt like maybe I didn't fit in, or maybe there was a part of me that wasn't going to be accepted. I've wanted to be in communities that didn't want me to be in it. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
there's been times when I thought like, well, I should be, or I want to be a part of that community or this thing. And they're like, no, we don't really want you here. um, for whatever reason.
yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different things. And if I'm trying to think of, I think moving here, and being in a new physical kind of location, and potentially with more people physically, um, I think I have an opportunity in some ways to kind of figure out what my community is. I think for me, I have my drag community, which is like in person as well as virtual and all that sort of stuff. I have I have spiritual community, which for me is challenging because I don't have I think sometimes I think of community like is like a group of people that are physically getting together in the
Mhm.
same room, or
I
like
think
that
that's
sort
a
of
big
thing. And
part of it. I think that's a big part of it. I think that's an
yeah,
important part of community that we've kind of lost with
yeah.
all of the digital age. Not that the digital age is bad. There's a lot of positives there, but we got to make sure that we even that out.
Well, yeah, well, and I think there's a lot of things that have kind of created that inability for us to be like in the same physical room with people. We had COVID. We have oftentimes if you're part of a marginalized group of people, or a group of people that feels outside of the norm of what you're in, sometimes it's the only way we can access people because maybe there's not people like us in our direct area. And I think also sometimes, some of us have different um, abilities to be either out in public, whether that has to do with like health reasons or, physical accessibility. Some of us can't get around, like we can't physically go places, or maybe there's mental health, or there's, concerns for getting it infection because you have a low immune system. I think there are a lot of things that kind of create barriers for us to being in like physical closeness with one another. Hey y'all, it's me again, Bonnie Violet. I just wanted to take a second and thank my Patreon members. Patreon members are folks who contribute on a monthly basis anywhere from $3 to $150 a month to support the work of a queer chaplain. Big shout out to Victoria Thompson, Jason Brandt, Brandon Stanton, Kim Silva, Brandy McCarg, Randy Sandknopp, Bob Kaiser, Joey Heckmeister, Violet Rhiannon, Gabriel, Jonathan, Petrick, and Todd Atkins Whitley. Thank you so much for your continued contributions. And if you're interested in joining the Patreon, just check the link in the description. Go to patreon.com/Bonnie Violet. Thanks so much. Bye bye.
You think there's a way that we could reach out to some of those groups of people and help them develop a personal community outside of the digital space? Because I really believe that having someone physically in your presence brings value to that
Mm-hmm.
to your life. Someone
Yeah.
who physically touches you or hugs you, or I think that brings value to your life. And
Yeah.
so when we're in a space where community is not tangible, I think it's really detrimental to our whole well-being
Mm-hmm.
and can cause a whole lot of other challenges for us to walk through. Is
Yeah.
there anything that you can think of?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I think just as a whole that we can try to do is to create spaces that are more accessible for people who might not typically be able to come into that space. So whether that's finding a way to help with transportation, um, or maybe it's about having the proper seating or accommodations, or maybe it's ASL, maybe maybe there's language barriers, So I think really working to create a space that is more accessible for folks. I know like wearing, I know is like was kind of a thing that brought up a lot, where some churches were like, we're just going to have church anyway, whereas I know some churches just chose not to go to church until everyone could go to church.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think part of that is just trying to think about how can we make the spaces that we're in more accessible for people to come into who haven't had access to it before, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, any other sorts of barriers. And then I think the other aspect is then how can we also bring community to people sometimes. I know
Yeah.
um, in like in the recovery community, there's oftentimes when sometimes somebody might end up being stuck in a hospital for an extended period of time. And so in recovery, getting to go to groups on a regular basis is pretty significant part of people's ability to kind of just have peace and serenity and hope and those sorts of things in life, is to have that connection with other people in a physical space. And so sometimes people will take then those meetings then will happen in that hospital room, or
Mm-hmm.
like they'll go, or sometimes they'll have those meetings in jails, or they'll have those meetings in hospitals, or they'll have their meetings in these other places to kind of bring community to people who aren't able to go out into community for whatever reason that might be. So I think that's an element of thinking about how can we bring community to people then. I think is the other aspect too.
Yeah. I've been dealing with that a little bit here, and it's sad because these are things that I hadn't even really considered. We get caught up in what's going on in the communities that we're in, and developing the communities that we have in front of us to do, and I've seen over the years I've missed a few. I think I've shared with you before my friend Elda. She's kind of a shut-in. She's 86
Mm-hmm.
years old, and in her case, she's not digital at all. She has a
Yeah.
really hard time using her computer and
Mm-hmm.
her phone and all of those things. And we have to make a tangible, conscious decision to
Mm-hmm.
to walk in to go visit Elda, because sometimes she doesn't answer her phone, or she can't get her answer her phone, or whatever. And so I've been recently understanding that she's not the only one in my community. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's an opportunity there to build a community. Because I find when I have that opportunity to sit with her, I learn so much. She has so much
Yeah.
wisdom. I had
Mm-hmm.
another friend that hurt herself, and so she can't drive. She can't take care of herself because she broke her arm. It's her right arm, so she can't cut her food. She can't cook her food. She can't feed her dog. All these things. I'm like, oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
now she's in a situation where she can get on digital and have some like FaceTime, like what we're doing here, but to
Mm-hmm.
have a tangible presence to not only just say, hey, I care about what's happening to you, but to cut up vegetables so she can stir fry them with her left hand later on in the week is really a community builder for her, and a different kind of community builder for her.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just some interesting things that I hadn't considered before, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
grateful that I haven't had to experience on my own yet.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's importance to have those spaces that are probably just with similar, like that there might be some sort of difference, if you will, that kind of keeps somebody out of a certain group or a certain space. But
Yeah,
I think there are probably a lot of spaces that if we kind of looked at it a little bit more, like could there be more than just one similarity? Or even because of our one similarity, are there other people who may have that similarity, but because they have another thing going on for them, they're not going to be able to have access to that group. So maybe they would
yeah,
benefit, say maybe there's a group for LGBTQ people and it's really great for people, but maybe there's not accessibility for wheelchairs, or there's not, or it's 100 miles from where a person lives, or you know what I mean, like there can be. So I think unless we're really thinking about, okay, how can we get more LGBTQ folks in this space, or how can we get more Christians, or how can we get more women, or how can we get like whatever, if we're really thinking about, okay, we're happy with who's in the room, but are there people that could be in this room that could benefit from being in this community that we're not making space for in some way or another? Are they not feeling
Yeah.
invited? Are we doing what we can to kind of eliminate some of those barriers that may keep people from, benefiting from the community in the same way that we get to? Um, so I think those are the things that that's not appropriate for all communities, but there's probably many of our communities that would do well to figure out how can we make the space more accessible to more people,
Yeah.
just in general.
What do you think some of the benefits are of being in community? It's easy for us to think about the things that we lose
Mm-hmm.
when we're not in community, but what are some of the things that we can gain when we're in community? And I think about, like you were saying before, community is a connection point, but is it limited to certain things that are familiar to us,
I mean,
or so? What are your thoughts on that?
yeah. I mean, I feel like a lot of it is our ability to be seen or heard um, that feels important. And oftentimes there are parts of ourselves that feel vulnerable or feel maybe you're even less comfortable with
Mhm.
in the general public with. And so I think being able to be in a space with other people that can see that and hear that and understand you when you're talking about some of that stuff. So I think part of it is an element. I think it helps you. I know a lot of my experiences, it's been helpful to be part of some of these affinity groups or these groups that are smaller groups of people that are connected by one thing, whether it's sexuality. I know, like with my HIV diagnosis, I really benefited from being around other people with HIV because that was something that I felt um, like I've just felt very much like I wasn't a part of the community as a whole. And I was having an experience that was so vastly different than everyone around me. And so being in the room with somebody else who had HIV just helped. It helped me feel less alone and seen. And it also, I think, allowed me to be able to speak out about some of these parts of myself that were just kind of experienced in my head, or, you know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, I think so much can just be happening in our head. And until we
Oh,
have an opportunity to
sure.
speak to somebody else about what's going on, it's hard for us to even really come to understand what's going. And oftentimes that stuff in our head is so much more powerful than it needs to be, because
Yeah.
when we speak it out or we share it with someone else, then it becomes less powerful and less like in like the overwhelming powerful kind of ways, becomes a little bit more bearable. um if we're talking about things that are maybe difficult for us to a difficult part of ourselves, or a part of ourselves that we don't feel strong in, I guess, maybe.
Mhm.
Um, and really trying to be around community to help us build up our strength in that area. And I think that's part of where it can go too far, where you can get to a point where, like, for me, I got to a point where I just felt like my life was like, I was so identified so much with, say, my HIV diagnosis or even my sexual orientation or my gender, that sometimes that can rob me from, there's so much more to me than that.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's important for me to be like, okay, yes, maybe I do need to hang out with people with HIV for a while so that I can feel better about it and work through some things. But, I think it's important for me to realize at some point in time, and I think that was really big for me to leave Idaho in the beginning, is because I felt like I needed to go somewhere and just not be the HIV, poster child, and the dot,
Mm.
dot, dot. Like I felt like I had to go somewhere else in order to really explore and find, and I think for other people to point out the other parts of myself that I hadn't been able to really either see myself or be able to really build on or strengthen. So, getting into other community for me has been so powerful in being able to even just find out more about myself, and for me
Yeah.
to be able to become even more of who I who I was created to be. So I think it can be limiting potentially.
Yeah, I think community is important and necessary, and I do think we have communities that can help us to pursue all the things that we were created to do, and I think there's also communities that can keep us from doing those things.
Mhm.
So it's important to do both. But I think you said something that I thought was really important, that be in a community that's, and this is a good community, a community that's empowering you, who's helping you to become better and to fulfill your purpose. That sometimes people in that community, once you build a trust with them, can show you like what we would call blind spots in our lives that we didn't realize we're lacking.
Yep.
And I think that's an opportunity for us. I also have found that when that happens, sometimes that expands my community, because now there's a part of my life or part of something that I didn't even realize was missing or not operating properly or whatever. And now it's opened up an opportunity for me to experience a different kind of people in a different type of a community.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, community is important. I always had this narrow mind of what community was until I've gotten more mature. That community was just my neighbors and the people that, drove
Yeah.
into their garages and shut their doors at night and didn't want to usually talk to you. But
Mm-hmm.
now realizing that as I've gone outside of that space myself, that I do have actual good neighbors and good community, the kind that I thought. But there's other communities that help me to develop and mature and to grow and to be a stronger, happier, fulfilled person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important. And I don't want to stop there. I think it's important that we also take that role in the community of other people, so
Yep.
that that's not just a one-sided thing. When we go into a community, we're not just always receiving, but we're giving back some of those
Right.
things that we're receiving from others around us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's oftentimes that's kind of the power of those sorts of spaces is that like kind of just by showing up, um, you're helping other people with what they're dealing through. And because they're showing up, you're feeling the same way. And because they share what they're going through, you get something from that. And then when you're able to share what you're going through, they're able to get something like that. So there's definitely a lot of mutuality in that. But I think
Yeah.
it is also important. So, like, I might have been talking a lot about just kind of connecting with similarities and like people that can kind of help us through some of our vulnerabilities or our weaknesses. But we are also part of communities that are a lot more diverse or a lot more. There might not even be like an agreement like a shared agreement, which I think sometimes in a
Yeah.
lot of communities, there's kind of like oh, we're all going to kind of abide by these rules, or we're all going to
No.
abide by these ways of being in relationship with one another, how we talk to one another, what we say to one another, what we don't say to one another, things like that. Whereas I think there are bigger communities, like maybe the city that we live in, or being just part of the world, or whatever, that then it might become a little bit different sort of relationship. And how do I then be um, in community with like a more diverse or different, group of people?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, all that's necessary. It's interesting that you said, I'm thinking, gosh, am I in any communities where I have rules? Because I
There
haven't
are kind of,
online, I guess I am, but I've never had that. But and maybe they're just unspoken
but
rules
even
that I
at
just never
church,
hear of.
like I mean, everywhere we go, there's kind of like social norms, or there are
Yeah, yeah,
agreements. They're kind of social agreements. They might not necessarily, in some places, they are actually
right,
written on
right.
the wall,
Post it.
or there's a book, and
Yeah,
other times it's
I
just
get it.
kind of
I just
like,
had never thought of it that
yeah,
way.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
so
I
it was
think
just like,
there
oh
is
yeah,
some sort of like social agreements,
yeah,
whether it's written or very known. And then because when those things are then gone, or people are outside of that idea of what those social norms are, then it does create some difficulty, I think, in being able to feel like you can be authentically you,
yeah,
um, in that space, whether it is, out on the street, or it's, at the church, or at the school, or at your parents' home, or like wherever it is. There are certain, I think, agreements, or certain like told or untold agreements that can help us be more full and whole, I think, in a space. And then if those things aren't quite met, then I think it can make the community, I don't know, I think it just limits maybe our experience of that community. And I don't necessarily think it's always a bad thing. Um,
yeah,
uh, yeah, I mean, there's a part of me, that I want, the kumbaya, like I want us all to live well together and find a way that we can make space for for people to have a, like for more people to
Yeah,
have a good experience and to have a similar equitable experience and
yeah.
access to life.
Yeah, I get that. I think there's always when you get people together in
Mhm.
community or even in family or whatever. I mean, we're going to irritate each other a little bit,
Yeah,
and so there's always going to be some aggravations, maybe stress points, maybe that we need to learn to work through. Because at the
yeah,
end of the day, if that community is a close community, we want to make sure that we can empower and encourage and love people while they're going through stuff. I
yeah.
found that most people usually are unlovely when they're going through stuff.
Mm,
And if we all just kind of shut the door and throw them outside the community, now they're kind of out there. Now what do? They don't have anyone
right.
to encourage them, anyone to guide them, if that's what they were looking for, anyone to remind them that they're awesome. Now they're
Hmm.
just kind of floundering, and who knows what they're going to find for another community or online or whatever.
Right.
So I just think it's important that one, we have communities around us because I think we need to not isolate ourselves. Isolation is not good for anybody.
Yep.
And I think it's important that we do allow ourselves to grow into other communities and experience some new things. As long as we're moving forward, if we're in a community that's pulling us backwards, we need to definitely walk away from that community.
Hmm. Yeah.
But I think we also need to be open to step into um, other people's lives, maybe to bring them into the community in some
Right.
capacity. My older friend may not ever be able to come out and do some of the things, but I can certainly pick her up and take her somewhere
Right.
and make her part of my community. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I just
Or
really
even,
would go ahead.
or I was gonna say, or even take people to her. Like maybe there's something that could be done at her
Absolutely,
house with a group of people, or I think there are
absolutely.
ways that we can get creative, if you will.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think that as we experience community, we have the ability to share that community with others.
mhm.
And I run into a lot of folks, and I'm sure you do because you engage with more folks than I do, I believe, that are struggling with not having a space where they can
Mhm.
be in community. And I
Yep.
think they've struggled in with depression. They struggle with being in their head and thinking negative things about themselves.
Mhm.
They're unwilling to participate because they don't think they're enough. So I think there's really an opportunity, and I think it's easy for us to get caught in that because it's easy.
Mm.
Well, this way
Yeah.
I don't have to do anything. No one requiring anything of me. I can do whatever I want. I can, whatever. And I think we have to be careful about all of those things. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
positives and there's some negatives and there's some responsibilities that we have being in a part of community. And we need to walk into that willingly to overcome whatever is going to come from that because there's not always going to be sunshine and roses, I think.
Right. And your sister, my aunt, says, Roxanne, she says, you need to learn to love yourself so you can love people in whatever community you're in.
That is
And
true.
yes, and I think, I think that it's also hard to, I don't think you can transmit something you haven't got.
I
So I
agree.
do think that you have to be given love, you have to feel love um, in order to give it. Um, and so I think part of that is being in a space in which you can receive the love as well,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I think there's a mutuality with love, but there is a sense of like, how can you can't love somebody else until you love yourself, but I don't think you can love yourself until I don't think you can learn. I don't know, I feel like I've learned love from other people,
Mm.
and the ability to be able to love and be loved more, I think, because other people have shown up for me in that way. And there, of course, there's like I think the sacredness and like the paradoxical aspect of kind of like the kitchen, what the chicken before the egg sort of thing. Like like I think they're kind of one and the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
They kind of happen together.
I think when we isolate ourselves, that ability to not love ourselves is more evident. You
Mm,
know what I mean? Or more possible, maybe is a better word. Because when we're by ourselves, we tend to think that there's something wrong with us. It's
yeah,
like if you look in the mirror enough times, you're going to see things that you don't like about yourself.
yeah,
And you're going to weigh on those things and try and do this and that. And so that limits our our I don't say our ability, we just stop. I don't know why, we just
Yeah.
do. And having a
Well,
community around us to
mhm.
point to those things helps out a lot. So go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, it's easier for us to get into a self-centered space, and self-centeredness isn't always about being, like, arrogant and full of
Right,
yourself in some sort of peacocky, pompous way. I
right.
know for me, I've been self-centered in times of my life because I'm dwelling on that thing that I feel separates me from everybody else, or that I'm not good enough, or any of that sort of thinking. So I think oftentimes we do have to kind of put ourselves out there in order to kind of get out of our self-centeredness and to get out of that
Mm,
kind of thinking and obsession, if you will, um, on parts of ourself that it's not useful to us or anyone else really around us. And in recovery, they talk a lot about like the way to get out of yourself is to work with another person in recovery. Like the
yeah,
best thing you can do if you're struggling with life, if you're struggling with your recovery, if you're just like, ah, go work with somebody else who is struggling too,
yeah.
or
Well, we need
and
each
that
other.
helps you get out of yourself. And oftentimes I believe there is this way, um and how I believe that God or whatever puts people and situations into your life at certain times of your life, in order to reflect to you what it is that you need to see or what could be helpful.
Hmm.
And I think oftentimes I find myself saying to people what I need to hear. Um, and I can't say that to myself unless I come into contact with other people that I get to share that with. Do you know what I mean? And so
Yeah,
oftentimes, because we do see the world from our perspective, if I'm telling you, telling you something about you or something that would help you, it's probably something that I need to hear for myself.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
That's true. That's one of the phrases or things I've adopted for myself over the years is that, okay, if someone else were in the same situation that you're in, how would you counsel them?
yeah.
And so I tried it. It's like, okay, I think I'm going to try that
Well,
because
and
sometimes we
yeah.
don't counsel others the way we would handle it ourselves.
Well, and at the end of the day, we don't really know what's best for anybody else. All we know is our own experience, and it's only our perception of their experience. You know what I mean? Like, because your experience is your experience. And I might think, oh, I get what she's saying. And so, like, I'm going to say this and it's going to help her. But I don't really know what your experience is fully. Something you're sharing might trigger something in mine. And then I might be able to share that. And you might be able to glean something from that that's helpful, um, or not. I think that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up too, that in being community, and I think it's something that you and I being in relationship with one another has allowed, I think, us both to probably be in community differently and be
Mhm.
in maybe either new communities or the same communities, just different. And I think one of the things that I think a lot of people miss is, and I think that maybe I've been challenged with in this relationship at times, is the fact that like understanding is the goal. I don't think understanding is the goal. I think understanding or seeking to understand, I think, is part of being in relationship with one another. But ultimately, the goal is compassion,
Mm.
no matter what, to have compassion. Um, and you know what I mean? And I think that's
Yep.
the thing that
Yep.
gets lost sometimes. It's like, I have to somehow, I think oftentimes we have to feel like I have to understand you. And then once I understand you, then I can be like, okay, all right, now I can have compassion for you.
No.
And that's not, I think
You're
that's what
right.
our
That's not.
problem is. I think that's what we
Yeah.
see in politics and so much in the world, is that people are like, oh, I don't understand you, so therefore you don't matter, right? Instead of being like, I don't understand you, but I love you, I care about you,
Mm.
I want you to have a good experience with life in the same way I want for myself. I think that's where oftentimes I think just because we don't understand someone or something doesn't mean we don't get to have compassion toward that person. I think in some ways it almost makes you, I would feel like you would maybe even cause you to have more.
Mm.
Um, but it doesn't. It doesn't always.
Sometimes people just would rather not be around things they don't understand. They want to be around things that are always comprehensive to them. But
Yeah.
I think you're right. We are not called to seek understanding. We're called to seek love and to
Mm.
show love in any situation that arises. And it's not always an easy place to be.
Right.
For me, having a foundation of core values or a guide in the Word of God helps me a lot to find
Mm-hmm.
a starting point on those moments that I'm not quite feeling it, or those moments that I'm kind of down on myself, or those moments that I can't see why this potential relationship or this person is in front of me that maybe I don't understand, or maybe I disagree with, or maybe I don't even like.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, so what is that about? Why is that? So when I go back to my foundation, I think it's important that we have a foundation of core values. For me, it's the Bible. I live by what the Bible says to me, and I try to respond to people according to what the Bible says to me. And I think having that gives me the opportunity to be sensitive to myself, maybe areas of my life that I didn't know were I'm not experiencing or that are blind spots for me, and also to the people that I've placed in front of me. I do not believe that people are put in my track just because just because. I believe that it's for a
Right.
reason. And so I like to say, okay, Lord, this is uncomfortable for me. This is not a space. This is not a community that I would choose for myself. I don't feel that these people are going to be edifying to me, but sometimes it's like, well, you need to be there. And so I'm like, okay, so help me to love first and ask questions later.
Right.
So bring in what I have to offer, as limited as it might be, and bring it into this space and trust that if I love these people, that I'm going to learn and gain from things, and they're going
Mm-hmm.
to learn and gain some things. Because if we all just, like you had said before, congregate together because we're the same, I think we're going to stay the same.
Yeah.
But when we allow ourselves to not only have that sameness, but allow ourselves to experience some differences also, that we can grow. So I think you're
Yeah.
right. Loving has to come before understanding because
Mm-hmm.
we may never fully understand.
Right. And if we think about like God's love or God's love being kind of the ultimate kind of love,
Mhm.
I think it's important to often realize that we are human, and because we are human, we don't we're not God. So
Right.
like we might be a piece of God, we might be part of God, but we are not God. And so like I don't so like we can't expect for us to show up in the same way God does, but we can channel God and try to act as if, right? Like, so it might be like, I don't understand you. I don't get why you're doing what you're doing. It doesn't make sense to me, but I can trust that, like, maybe God does, and God's going to love you anyway. So why can't I channel that somehow? Do you know what I mean? And maybe that's where compassion comes in instead of
Mm.
judgment um, or even some sort of like attack, whether it's verbal, spiritual, like whatever, some sort of like separating, if you will, um, between you and that person because of like whatever, and that's not to say sometimes you need to physically separate yourself from people and circumstances or whatever, but that doesn't mean
Yeah.
you can't still have compassion or love or care or respect for another person's humanity.
Right.
And I feel like sometimes that's what spirituality or God can, like, that can kind of be a role that God or higher power still kind of plays in my life. Is like, I don't maybe have to understand it, but with, I can tap into something else or channel something better than me, um, or something with more abilities than I to kind of help me show up a little bit better. I will never be God, but oftentimes we try to immolate or try to act as if as much as we can, but I think understanding
Yeah.
that we're still human at the same time.
Absolutely. But you're right. Our desire is to allow the characteristics of God flow through our lives and to other people. And we're not going to get it
Mhm.
right every time. That's what God's grace is for.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about people, for me, my desire is that I would have eyes to see people, I would have ears to hear the cries of their heart, and I would have the courage to respond
Mm.
in a way that can be first loving, and then maybe in a way that I can come alongside them in some capacity. And sometimes I find those people within my community. Sometimes I find those people on the perimeter of my community. And I just need to be willing, no matter where they're at, to go ahead and just reach out my hand
Yeah.
and trust that if I trust the outcome and make sure that I'm stable in my position. I always want to be an encourager. And when I catch myself being anything but an encourager, I try to stop. I try to apologize if I've already gone forward and maybe said something or done something that was not encouraging or uplifting. And then I step back and I try to regroup and spend some time with God is what I do with that. And then I go back out again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for me, community has been so important in my life at all levels of my life. Sometimes it's been uplifting, sometimes it's not. It's given me the ability to tell the difference, which is so important. It's given me the opportunity to see some of my blind spots. I know I still have a lot to learn and to experience about myself. But at the end of the day, it's given me the ability to love other people because I realize how human I am. And like you just said, none of us are perfect. We're all aspiring to be the best
Yeah.
that we can be and to be who God's created us to be.
Yeah. One of the people that I interviewed in the past, Hollywood, Texas, for a trans and spirituality conversation, and when you were talking about like I want to see and hear and things like that, it made me think of like how they kind of switched some of the ideas of like we maybe we see with our eyes, but we also see with our heart and we
Mm-hmm.
hear with our heart, and our heart has intelligence and our brain has, you know what, like, and so I think part of that too, I think just to take it to another level is to try to challenge myself to think of what is it that I can't see that I could still see with other parts of myself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we are all out of time, and I do have to run to another thing because we're at the 45 minutes. But I'm really glad that we were able to make this conversation today. Next
Yeah.
week we are going to talk about, next week is Trans Day of Visibility, and so we're going to spend a little bit of time next week talking about trans visibility. And so I think, my anticipation is that we'll kind of talk about what our experience was around hearing about trans people growing up, and
Okay.
kind of what that experience has been, and then also kind of like how that experience has been with us in my transness, and kind of like, I don't know, see where that takes us. But really just kind of spending some time to really talk about what our experience with transness has been, as me as a trans person and you as somebody who's not trans, but you still have an experience and a perception, and you are part of my visibility. So
Yeah.
yes, so thank you, everyone. Do you want to
Thank you,
say goodbye?
everyone. Yep. Everyone have a great week. Thank you for joining the conversation and get out there and get into the community.
Awesome. Take care. Bye. Splintered Grace Podcast is brought to you by a queer chaplain. Follow us on all of our social medias, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at a queer chaplain. Listen to us wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe, comment, like, and share. Feel free to tip us at Venmo, Bonnie Violet, and support monthly on Patreon. The song is original by Stephen Sandknopp, The Chasm Between Us. Rest in peace, Stephen. Hey, how's it going? Bonnie Violet here. I'm a trans femme, genderqueer, spiritual drag artist, and digital chaplain. And in case you didn't know, I could really use your support. Engage, rate, subscribe, follow, comment, share this episode, book me to keynote, panel, guest on your show, or officiate your wedding or memorial, in or out of drag, collaborate, join the team, be a guest, make a pitch, sponsor an episode, join my Patreon, send me a tip on Venmo or PayPal. Just do something. Thank you so much for your continued support. Check out the links in the description.